enjoying their lunch. We have a very special guest here for our lunch keynote. We're going to hear from Richard Kidd. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Energy and Sustainability. He's from the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Installations, Energy and Environment. I'd like to present Richard Kidd.
Britt, thanks for inviting me to come on down and speak with everyone here today. I don't know whether I should be here or whether I should run and hide. I couldn't help but driving last night up from El Paso to White Sands and over from White Sands to listen to the radio. And I've concluded that everyone who's running for office from both parties and both states wants to go back to Washington and clean out federal bureaucrats like myself. So. But you know, seriously, I'm actually very, very proud to serve our country as a member of our senior executive service. And I know in the Army that we work very hard to do the right thing with taxpayer dollars and the right thing by our mission, and our mission to protect and defend the country. And our energy efforts are part and parcel of that. And I'm very pleased to be here today and talk to you about what the Army's doing, principally on energy, but a little bit on sustainability as well, and making the connection as to why we're doing this. And we're doing it because it's essential to the Army's mission success, all right? Both our cost, our reputation, but making sure that we have the energy that we need to perform our mission, and that we make decisions today so that the Army of tomorrow has choice, that it has the land and the water, the energy, and the community relations that it needs to function and prosper. So, let me see here. There we go. We have the presentation. So I'm going to talk for, Britt said I had an hour and a half. I'm not going to take an hour and a half of your time. I'll talk for 20 minutes, half hour or so, and I'll be happy to take any question that you have. I'm used to hard questions, and if it's too hard, I'll just tell you it's too hard. But, all right, let's see here. So let's talk about the Army energy in perspective. So the Department of Defense on a whole is the largest energy consumer in the country. The Army is the largest facility energy consumer in the country. So we buy more electricity and steam than any other entity in the federal government. Almost $4 billion in liquid fuel in FY11. It'll be even higher than that in FY12. The liquid fuel went up by 30%, so we have very significant price volatilities in our fuel purchases, which of course put strains on anyone's budget. A couple of the views down there below. Thomas Friedman's view is sort of the quote that hangs over my office. It's sort of like my personal sword of Damocles, but that's what I do. I'm trying to make the Army more energy efficient and sustainable. And we're treating this just like the Army's done in the past. Look, we were the first, one of the first organizations to desegregate, to integrate women, to take a stand against smoking. And we're doing that also on the sustainability front. And we did all of those earlier things not because we felt compelled to sort of some great social good, and those were all social goods, but because they were important to our mission. And you can see some quotes from the uniformed officers at the bottom making this exact and very explicit link, particularly in the operational environment, which I'm going to talk a little bit about during the slides. So this is my mission and the mission of the position that I'm currently privileged to perform. I put that up there a little bit in part because just for conferences like this, you'll notice that I don't buy anything, all right? So I don't buy anything. I set policy. So just a reminder, so if you want to hit me up with the greatest, best product, the widget that'll save 40% on the diesel engine, that's fantastic. And I will refer you to others in the Army who might make a purchasing decision. But I work on policy. And I am the Army's senior energy executive. So I'm the senior most person in the Army that has energy full-time, all the time, both on the facility side and on the operational energy side. And, you know, our sister service is the iconic image of the Navy. is a ship. The iconic image of the Air Force is a plane. The iconic image of the Army is a soldier. And our sister service is not to take anything away from them, but their energy problem is sort of well defined, all right? They can focus on a ship or a plane, but we have to focus on all the engines and the batteries and the facilities that serve that soldier when he or she goes into combat. So our Army Power and Energy Framework, we take a look at our bases on the installation side, like Fort Bliss and in White Sands Missile Range, contingency bases in Afghanistan. We look at the soldier, the power on the soldier, all right? Right now, an infantry soldier carries 7 different types of batteries, sometimes 70 of those batteries, 16, 17, 18 pounds into combat. Right? That's the soldier's load. That's their physical power load that they have to carry. And oftentimes on an infantry patrol, the first item that needs to be resupplied for that patrol is the batteries. So the demand for the for power right at that individual soldier is really focusing the Army's attention. And every single specialist or private in the Army who's been deployed and has to carry these batteries is a power manager, if you will. All right? And they're very cognizant and conscious of the need and the advantages that they have from having sufficient energy. If they don't have that, they're aware of the disadvantages that they have. And the vehicles, actually I'm going to go back to the soldier just a second. I mean, this is one of the things we're trying to do in the Army is spend a great deal of thought and effort in changing our design processes. So I'm not a big advocate of any technology, all right? I don't have a stake in solar versus wind versus biomass or any of these things. I am a big advocate for integrated whole systems design, where you look at life cycle and the compounded effects of the decisions that you make. So for the American soldier, what we've done is we've given that soldier every tactical advantage that he or she can possibly have on the battlefield. We've given him the best sights, the best communications gear, the best night goggles, the GPS, an individual computer for situational awareness. All of these things make that individual a very significant overmatch of any enemy that we've got out there. The problem is we've designed them all individually. We didn't optimize this as a power system. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about some of the great solutions that are now coming out of the Army labs. And then the third sort of component of the Army Power and Energy Framework is vehicles, both tactical and non-tactical. I'm not going to talk too much about this during this presentation, but there's a recognition, particularly again on the whole systems thinking, that you have to look at the totality of the energy demands within a vehicle. And you know, one of the best examples, I'm sure many of you know what the M1 tank is. Best tank in the world. When they were making the purchasing decision back in the late 70s and early 80s, the decision was made to take out an alternate power unit, an alternate power generator, to save $5,000 on the purchase price of the M1 tank. M1 tank has a 1,500 horsepower gas turbine engine. It consumes 76 gallons of fuel an hour when it's out there maneuvering and driving, and it's amazing. You know, it can go 60 miles an hour, it can do all these great things. When that tank is in idle, gas turbine engine, it consumes 70 gallons an hour without moving. So what we found after the initial days of the Iraq War, that those tanks were basically put in stationary overwatch, and the crew had to have the power to run their sights, their comms gear, and their air conditioner. So they were consuming 70 gallons of fuel an hour to do that. Right? So think of the cost-benefit analysis and the decision that was made to take that generator off the tank to save $5,000. Within a few days, you've already burned through that much fuel, particularly if you fully burden cost of fuel. So the Army's starting to look at our vehicle fleet. We've got we're getting some vehicles out there now that are 70% improvement over miles per gallon. We also have a lab up in Michigan called the Ground Systems Power Engineering Laboratory. We're putting so much electric gear now on our vehicles that the electric load is actually degrading vehicle performance. So we now have to think of our vehicles as again, as a system. So, but I don't have a slide on vehicles themselves, and happy to take some more questions if they come up. So this is the basis of the Army Energy Program. I mean, this is Energy Management 101. You know, the university down the street probably teaches this. First and foremost, you've got to change behavior, all right? Make every soldier a power manager, have energy considered in all the decisions that we make. Corporately, the Army has integrated energy into our enterprise-wide strategic plan. You know, that's inside bureaucratics is not that exciting for most folks, but every organization has a strategic plan, all right? And for every successful organization has a strategic plan. And so the Army is now incorporated into its strategic plan called the Army Campaign Plan, energy and sustainability as one of the 8 highest strategic objectives of the organization. We have metrics, we have charts to manage that, a reporting system, and sustainable use of natural resources has been made one of the foundational values of the Army. So previously we talked about sound financial management. Now it's sustainable use of the resources, which includes the financial resources entrusted to the Army's care. Drive efficiency, integrate renewables and alternative energy, and then you have to have a foundation of investment, or at least awareness in science and technology. The Army is not the principal investor in raw science on energy. About the only thing that we really are early technology investment is on that soldier, the management of power in and around the individual soldier. So power density, batteries, and power transfer on the soldier and in his and her environment. So I'm going to talk about, if you remember my slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about installation energy, then about operational energy, and then about a little bit on our science and technology. So installation energy, as you saw earlier, the Army is the largest facility energy consumer in the federal government. There are a variety of goals and mandates that Congress has given the Army in various pieces of legislation, and actually given the entire federal government. Because the Army uses about 25+% of that electricity, the success of the federal government is very much dependent on the success of the Army. When myself and Ms. Hammock, we came into the Army essentially to pretty much at the same time, we made a conscious decision not to manage by mandate. So the congressional mandates pretty much stop with me in my office, and I'm accountable to Congress for that. We've made the decision to manage by mission. And if we look at the mission and the energy requirements, we believe that the mandates will take care of themselves. Overall, since 2003, and I picked that year because it's the start year for an energy requirement given us by Congress. Since 2003, the Army has reduced its total electric consumption on our installations by 13%. During that same time, the number of individuals assigned to our installations has increased by 20%. So that's activated Guard and Reserve, it's Grow the Army, and it's civilian contractors. We've been at war, we've expanded the number of folks. So 13% reduction against a 20% increase in the individuals on our installations, and a 50% increase in our utility bill during that time. So that while we are looking for 3, 4, 5% reductions each year, in many energy markets or utility markets, our average across the Army is about 7% a year, utility rate increase. Some markets it's less than that. There's some deflationary pressure in certain markets. In other markets it's higher than that. On the installation side, we've established a net zero initiative. We've picked 17 installations to pioneer net zero energy, waste, and water. I'll show that in a little bit in a later slide. But the intent here is, again, to try to inculcate whole systems integrated design on our installations. We're looking at them as a systems of systems, where waste flows from one process might be repurposed and turned into a resource for another process. And we're also migrating this approach to our base camps down in Afghanistan. Energy savings performance contracting. I think that many of you know what that is, but it's a mechanism where an outside contractor comes in, provides the capital for facilities upgrades, and they're paid back over time through their energy, through the energy saved. The Army is the largest user of ESPCs in the federal government. We have a robust program, and we're expanding that use going forward. We formed the Energy Initiatives Task Force, which is a dedicated team to work on large-scale renewable projects. I'll talk about that. And in terms of our non-tactical vehicle fleet, these are the vehicles on our installations. We have aggressively moved to right-size, downsize, and integrate new technologies. Last year alone, we cut our petroleum consumption by 8%. So we're pretty pleased with what we can do on our non-tactical vehicle fleet. So net zero, here's a definition of the net zero energy, waste, and water that we're pursuing. This is a hallmark of our sustainability efforts. Of course, you see Fort Bliss down there. Fort Bliss was picked for all three. We picked the 17 pilot installations in part. They're geographically dispersed. They're dispersed across commands and regions. That means they have different endowments for either renewables. Some of them have different challenges and different technologies that may be applicable. The challenges for water at Fort Lewis, a very water-rich environment, are much different than they would be at Fort Bliss. But as I said, why are we doing this? Well, we're not doing it to be green for green's sake. We're doing it to make sure that the Army of the future has choices and options. And they have choices and options that they can afford. One of the best examples is landfills. So the Army right now has 17 landfills on our installations that we own and manage, and that the municipal solid waste goes into those landfills. Well, those landfills are going to be filled within 10 years. At that point, the Army will not have a lot of choices. We will either have to take prime training land out of use for training and turn it into a landfill, or we're going to have to export our municipal solid waste. That involves a not necessarily pleasant conversation with the local communities. It's very expensive. You've got tipping fees. Sometimes you actually have to go across state lines. If any of you are in that business, there's plenty of room for collaboration, but there's also plenty of room for confrontation and cost. So it's something that we want to avoid being put in that box. And we think that we can do this, and we've got a number of interesting and exciting programs to reduce our waste, to divert items from the landfill. Fort Lewis has actually found that their old buildings, rather than having to pay to demolish those old buildings, they can actually get paid for the materials in those buildings that can all be recycled. So Fort Lewis has close to a 100% construction diversion rate from the landfill, and we're also now looking to do what Walmart has done in its supply chain, and we're asking a lot of our suppliers, we don't own the packaging, all right, you own the packaging, all right? We're not responsible for the disposal of some of these items, you are. And so we're trying to force our supply chain to take a more holistic look at the products. We're early days on that. If any of you are in the Army's supply chain and you're not starting to think that way, I would encourage you to do that, all right, because it's coming. It's coming both in terms of Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, which I can talk about, but also in terms of some of the cost avoidance that the services want to undertake. So that's our net zero effort. The intent is to make this standard practice in the Army, to make our installation management practices all built around the principles of sustainability. We've just had a programmatic EIS come back that says no significant impacts across the Army for our net zero efforts. On net zero energy, we have found that we think that we can get to that all of the installations out there can get 70% or better at net zero energy without additional cost. So some of the installations will get there for, and I say additional cost, I mean in terms of net present value costs. Third-party financing, this is just a chart of our use of energy savings performance contracts as well as utility energy services contracts. These are essentially the same formulation of an arrangement. ESPC is with an outside vendor. UESC is with your utility on the installation. The difference is that normally an ESPC can be more aggressive, can have more and a wider variety of measures deployed. The UESC is, though, faster. There's already a sanctioned monopolistic relationship with the utility, so there's no contracting involved in the use of a UESC. But the UESCs are oftentimes dependent on state regulations and incentives, and they may not have the opportunity to be as comprehensive or as deep in the level of retrofits that we might like them to be. So installations are encouraged to use the right one in the right situation, and it varies, of course, by state and utility. You know, again, we talk about utilities. We've got El Paso Electric in the room and a variety of commissioners. One factoid I always find fascinating about the Army is we have 150-some installations, which are essentially small towns all around the country, and we have 200 different utilities. So we have more utility partners than we do installations. Some of them, they have overlapping jurisdictions, some with different water and other things. But we also span the gamut from a relationship with every single type of utility, from a rural co-op to a very large regional power provider like the Southern Company. So we recognize that basically if you've seen one Army relationship with its local utility, you've seen one Army relationship with its local utility. The Energy Initiatives Task Force is a dedicated effort by the Army for the deployment of large-scale renewable energy projects. I came on board about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, actually, next week. So the next week will be my 2-year anniversary in the Army. Very quickly took a look at what the Army was trying to do with renewables and said, you know, we're just not postured for success. We are going to use a 30-year power purchase agreement authority, which means we're going to have to find a developer, and that developer is going to have to attract finance and capital. And I started to talk about the cost of capital, our attractiveness to the private sector, how do we reduce our time to deployment, and these were all terms that essentially the only other person in the Army who understood them was my boss, Ms. Hammock, and which was good. And so we worked together and said, look, we've got to have a dedicated team to think through this and make the Army an attractive partner, right? We can't, there's no 4-star general in the Army that can order Bank of America to invest in a renewable project on Army land. It doesn't work that way. We have to compete for that investment. We have to fight for it. And we have to think of ways where we can leverage our balance sheet, our size, and our ability to make a long-term purchase of up to 30 years. So we can do that 30-year PPA. How do we leverage that to attract private capital? And how do we overcome, which private industry recognizes as one of the biggest impediments working with the federal government, is our procurement system. All right? We are in no illusions about how hard it is to do work with the federal government. But this is, you know, the Congress of the United States has given us the federal acquisition regulations, which provide a variety of services. But the most important one is they prevent nepotism from Congress itself. So we have to go through this free and fair competitive process. So we've made a deliberate investment in the Army to do all that we can to streamline that process and take risk out of the private sector. So in the past, there was discussion about wind turbines. I heard the discussion about the Met Tower. In the past, the Army may have said, okay, we think we've got a wind resource in the north quadrant of this installation, and how many private developers are interested? Okay, and so we'll pick one, and you guys go up there and you put up your Met Towers, and you can move around, and you do this and you do that, and the risk is all on you, so you go spend a couple of $1 million of your money, and if you don't find anything, well, thanks for your time. So we've changed that around. And now we will put up the Met Tower. We will go to the area, and then we will go to the developer a year and a half down the road and say, look, here's the grid parameters, here's your geo-reference polygon, here's our initial data from a Met Tower, and any good developer probably isn't going to take that data, they're going to want their own data, but at least they're going to know that there's a viable wind resource there, and they're not working off of an NREL map, that's what I heard earlier, and I like NREL. NREL is a great organization, but every wind asset has to essentially be tested before you put up a tower. So we're taking that load on ourselves. Same with solar, same with geothermal, and we built a team of that goes out there and looks at these projects and these 8 risk areas. Now, I'm not sure you can see those risk areas from where you are, and I'm not sure I can see them from where I am either. But the first one up there is mission security, all right? So we are making a deliberate effort on the Army that, so this is what I said about mandates versus missions. We have a couple of installations in the Army that have very, very low loads and very, very high renewable endowments. We could probably get a gigawatt of solar and wind power on 3 installations with a combined installation load of 15 megawatts. So that doesn't do anything for the Army's mission, or it does very little for the Army's mission. So we made the deliberative decision that we're going to look at projects 10, 20, 30, 40 megawatts, and we're going to look at them at a wider distribution of installations across the Army. Our intent is that they will be on our side of the meter, and that in the event of a grid outage, they would be able, at some future point, to provide an increased degree of energy security for the installation. We can talk about that in a second. I've got another slide, and because this is very important that we understand, that you understand what we're trying to do and what we are not trying to do. All right, we are not trying to island the Army bases. We are not trying to get into the utility business. We are not trying to fragment service areas or to have an impact on ratepayers. All right. That's not what we are attempting to do, all right? What we are and will do is we will work with our local utilities, every one of those 200, wherever we go, up front in a deliberative manner to look at a way that we can create a value proposition that is important for both the Army and the utility, all right? In some places, and if you look the value proposition, the second one up there is economics. Some places the economics just don't work, all right? They just don't work. Okay, if you're in my home state of Oregon, the Great Pacific Northwest, and you've got 2.5, 3 cent hydro, and you've got, I don't know, 60, 70 days of sun a year, you're not, you know, solar isn't going to be there's going to be a pretty long payback on that solar project. So, but we look at the economics, and we're looking at ways where our but putting those renewables on Army installations, we can create a value proposition for all involved, the Army and the utility and others. Over time, we do want to deploy microgrids that would allow the would allow the power on the installation to be moved to the critical needs on that installation. We could link in the generators that we have. We could link in other assets. We are looking a variety of ways. If we put these microgrids on there, can we then get involved in demand response, peak shaving, ancillary services back to the utility? So we're trying to look at a way that we can offer a value proposition to the utility. So a couple of examples from our sister service, the Air Force, down in the southeast. They put gas peaker plants, dual fuel plants, on 2 of the Air Force bases that are owned and operated by the utility. They're a utility asset. They come online when the utility needs them. They also are utilities black start, and because they're dual fuel, they can operate off the aviation fuel that the Air Force is storing on that site. And if the grid were to go down, it's set up that they would operate off the Air Force's fuel, and meet the needs of those installations. So it's a great win-win-win value proposition, and we're in conversations around the country on how we can do that. A couple of the other risk things that our team looks at is real estate regulations, offtake. If we do have a large project, there's got to be somebody to use the power. And I guess everyone may have heard about the Army project at Fort Irwin. It was talked about as a 1 gigawatt project. And there's easily a gigawatt of solar out at Fort Irwin, California, but there's no transmission lines. All right, so who's going to put in the line? Who's going to take that power? So why build a 1 gigawatt plant if you don't have an off-taker for it? Integration, NEPA, and then the actual acquisition. Do we have a clear way to put this plant forward, depending on ownership issues? The point of all these risk areas, I'm telling you, is that in the last 12 to 14 months, the Army has put together a team of experts that comes out and supports the installation with this body of knowledge to accelerate the projects and to forge an effective relationship with the utility, with the developers, and the installation. One of the first applications of this has been in this area with Fort Bliss. You've got the team from Fort Bliss here. You've got El Paso Electric. Look, there's been challenges in that relationship. But in the past, rather than having this been an ad hoc hit or miss deal, we've come together with what we think is a dedicated Army effort to address all the issues and all the equities to come up with a solution. And I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to have a pretty unique project here in Fort Bliss and some models that we can take around the country and say, look, okay, this is the power utility situation in El Paso, which is kind of unique, and we were able to work through an effective solution that made a good deal for everyone. And this is, we've done a range of models with the EITF, and part of the job of the EITF is not to make every project go forward. Part of the job is to take a bad project and say, this isn't worth, it's not worth the time. We don't have an off-taker, or we're never going to get the numbers right, or it's just not the right environment. So we've got a pipeline out there. Our initial computer screen, we've got 4 gigawatts or more of renewable potential in the Army. We're looking at, from that, and that's in about 180 identified potential projects. 3 or 4 of those move forward to opportunity assessment. And this is basically a more rigorous desktop analysis. It's with some NREL folks. It's with some Pacific National Lab folks, consultants, and others. We try to take a look through this at the desktop level and say, does this make sense or not? If it does, then it moves forward to that execution. And that's where we actually go out with the installation and engage, and we start the deliberative discussions with developers and utilities to move it forward. We think we've got 4 projects that we're going to announce at least the RFP for before the end of the calendar year. Our intent then is to do, we think that this pipeline will put out 1 project a quarter, if not more, probably about 5 to 6 a year, on average of 150 to 200 megawatts a year. So we've got more projects in the pipeline than our goal, than our public statement, and we think that we can meet this. One item of this, of course, is acquisition. And for those of you who have been watching, the Army announced a competition for a multiple award task order contract and for developers to do power purchase agreements on Army installations. This PPA, MATOC, was 2 years in the making. So literally, within a couple of months after my arrival in the Army, I said, we don't even have approval yet for the EITF. We don't have approval to do these other things. But I'm not going to wait for the approval. I'm going to start the acquisition strategy development and process. The aim of having the MATOC is we think that this 2 years of work will allow us to take anywhere from 6 to 18 months out of the development time on a project level. Because then we will go back to the pre-approved list of project developers and we will not have to do the first round of competition. And that will save us, as I said, 6 to 18 months or more on each task order. So that will allow us to accelerate the timeline for these projects. At the same time, we in the Army have spent a lot of time up on Wall Street and in San Francisco and other places where the capital is. And we're trying to talk to the providers of capital and say, look, if you see a wind project at this installation from this developer, put it in context, right? The underlying risk is not the developer. The underlying risk is the Army. And you could argue the Army's going to, we've been here for a long time, we're going to be here for a long time. You could also argue that, you know, if things get really bad, you're going to pay the Army before you'll stop paying the T-bills before you stop paying the Army, right? So, so we're going to be here and we're a good risk. And so we've talked to Wall Street through this. We've given a long, detailed explanations of this. We visited all the banks, and we're basically trying to jawbone down the cost of capital. So when those developers go out there, the Wall Street will look at this in a different context and hopefully reduce, make capital more available, and B, reduce the capital cost for the Army. What's really interesting and fascinating from my trip up to Wall Street, and lots of discussions about natural gas and other things, the folks on the street say, we believe there's a carbon bubble. No one's now talking greenhouse gas emissions or global warming or carbon tax or carbon trading. But we honestly believe that many of our fossil fuel assets are overvalued because the full costs are not priced into their stocks. And as a big asset holder, we want to make sure a part of our portfolio is renewable energy. And they said, we, the banks, are in this. Yep, we're going to loan money to natural gas guys. That's a good play. But we are not going to stop loaning to renewables. And we will accept a lower rate of return to make sure that we have a balanced portfolio in the energy space. And I found that to be a very interesting set of comments. And we got that from different banks on the same day. So I'm not sure they were coordinating their calls. You know, we're at one bank in the morning and one in the afternoon. I'm not sure how much the banks share with each other their strategy, but I found this to be a very interesting observation from the banks when we were up there talking. So mission, operational energy. Up until about a year and a half ago, the Army didn't even think about operational energy. Right? If we wanted it, it was there. And our magnificent Army got as much fuel as was needed to the edge of the battlefield. But we started to realize that this dependence on fossil fuel for our military is creating tremendous vulnerabilities at the geostrategic level, at the operational level, and the tactical level that our enemies are using to our disadvantage. They are exploiting these vulnerabilities, and that we have to address our fuel consumption equation in the tactical environment, on our operational environment, to reduce these vulnerabilities. Whatever people may or may not think of the war in Iraq, you know, I was in the State Department at that time in the Bureau of Political and Military Affairs. We had to send the Vice President of the United States of America to the Middle East to ask, essentially we had to ask permission of the surrounding countries that we could execute this operation, and by getting their permission and assurance that we would have the fuel that we needed, a geostrategic vulnerability. In Iraq, 70 to 80% of our resupply weight was fuel, was either fuel or water, okay? 18% of our casualties were in the protection of our convoys, all right? So those 80% of that convoy was fuel and water. It wasn't ammunition, it wasn't parts, it was fuel and water. Interestingly, right now in Afghanistan, 40%, a little more than 40% of our liquid fuel is used to produce electricity. All right. So if you were to look at the BTUs consumed, the Air Force consumes the most BTUs and the most fuel of any of the services, and that's in their aircraft. In the Army, our energy, it's interesting, both on our installations and operationally, the largest component is electricity. We know right now that we have the technology and the means to reduce our electric consumption in our base camps, in our forward operating bases, by between 30 and 60%. All right, so that's, what's I'll round off. What's 50% of 40? We could reduce our fuel consumption right now by 20% with just today's technologies. And a lot of this goes back to asking the right questions and integrated design. So that fifth bullet point down there, mini grid, what is a mini grid? Well, it's an interesting term. But anyway, what the Army had done is we deployed to Afghanistan with one generator per load. Oftentimes, these generators were at 20, 30, 40% operating. A generator likes to operate at 75 to 80%. So we had spot generation all around our camps. All we did was we came in, removed those spot generators, and put in large central generation capacities, multi-megawatt generator systems. That saved 50 million gallons of fuel. We did it, payback period of between 12 and 18 months. We did it in 1 year. We could have done it in 2001. We had the contract vehicle, we had the technology. We've had generators for a long time. We just didn't ask. No one thought to ask. So by asking, we found the solution. Huge savings, all right? We've accelerated the fielding of a new generator. The amps down there, it uses 21% less fuel than the one that it's replacing, and it is designed to be networked, all right? It's designed to be an intelligent power solution, and intelligent power is very important. What was interesting, we said, we got a lot of pushback, and the engineering community said, well, the engineering life of the current generators is fine. We don't need to accelerate that. We want to use the current generators all the way up until the day they break, and then we'll bring in the new one. But we said, look at the fuel costs. Look what this 21% fuel savings. It will pay for itself. So we're trying to move, this was an 18-year procurement program. We're trying to move that total procurement to be executed within 7 years. We'll see what the budget does. But so what's interesting now, and I wish I had another picture up here, but at the forward edge of the battlefield, all right, this is an infantry platoon or company paired up with an Afghan counterpart. A lot of times their fuel is either dropped in by an aircraft, C-17, or flown in by a helicopter. Or in some cases, when the convoys come in, they know the convoy is going to get shot up. 100% of the time, the convoy will get shot up going in or out. May or may not take casualties. And so in one of these bases, they had 6 generators, all of them underutilized, or it's called wet stacking. So your generator's not working optimally. It's causing fluctuations in power quality. It's breaking. Then when it breaks, it's moved to the side. The lack of, we're the Americans, if we see the generator loading at 40%, oh, that's bad, let's get another generator. So we've doubled down on this generator distribution. And we came in there, and we came in with a team that looked at the loads, so how what's called our environmental conditioning units. Army can't just say air conditioners, so it has to say environmental conditioning units. So our ECUs, that's because AC is an acronym that's already been taken. It stands for active component. So we couldn't say air conditioner because then it would have been AC, and we've already used that acronym. So we had to make ECU. That was supposed to be a joke. We'll see if people are awake. Anyway, by deploying more efficient, working on our load side, reducing the demand, putting 3 new generators in that were networked, putting solar panels in, and a battery storage, what we were able to do is basically service the loads off the batteries. The generators are idle when there's sufficient solar panel power, and the solar panels would power the battery. When there was insufficient solar power, or when the load got too high, then the generators would kick in. They would kick in and operate at their optimal level, 70, 75%, charge the battery, and shut off. We've been able to get, in some cases, a 70% fuel savings by this configuration. But we don't talk about the fuel savings because that's only, for this base, that's only about 180 to 230 gallons a day. That's not a lot. But what we talk about is we are now giving back to the operational commander aircraft. We're saying you don't need to divert a C-17 to refuel these bases. You can use that C-17 for something else. Or the UH-60 aircraft. We can say, look, you can take those two UH-60s and their gunship escort, and you can do something else with them. You don't need them. And when we start to reflect the energy saved in terms of mission effectiveness gained, it really resonates with the Army. And so now we are accelerating the deployment and conversion of basically all of our installations in Afghanistan. And I predict that by 2014, whatever is left in Afghanistan, you're going to see hybrid, renewable, diesel, battery storage systems on every Army base. You're going to have 100% across every residual Army installation in Afghanistan. And it's not because we're being green, it's not because we're making a political statement, it's because of the fact that means our helicopters and our soldiers can do other things than guard fuel and fix generators. And we're developing, the Army's doctrinally driven. We've got an operational energy doctrine that's rolling out. We're going to teach this stuff in our schools. We're going to add a warrant officer to every Army brigade team who's thinking about brigade power distribution and management. That's going to be their job. So that this is going to be part of just the way the Army does business. And we've got an investment of a technology investment. These are a lot of the things that we're investing in. On the soldier in particular, again, a slide I should have put in here. The individual soldier, what we're doing on the power solution is, the soldier carries that heavy vest. He's got we call it a ceramic plate in front for ballistic protection. We've now got a battery that's the same shape of that plate, and it fits right behind the plate. Connects to the vest, and now every piece of electric gear on the soldier is powered by one battery. All right? The weapon batteries are still not on that. What we're doing is we're also equipping that soldier with rechargeable batteries. So when the war began, 2% of the Army's batteries were rechargeable. Now they're 52%. And we're giving the soldiers fabric-mounted solar blankets, PV blankets. We're giving them fuel cells, tactical multi-fuel generators, and one battery connector. So you can now take any battery the soldier wears or uses, and you can charge it from multiple systems. You can charge it from the vehicle. All right? We didn't have we didn't have a cigarette lighter in our vehicles. But we can now plug into our vehicle and charge our electric kit. And on the patrols, as I told you earlier, that the battery was the first item that needed to be resupplied on the patrol. Well, why is that significant? Well, if you're a patrol and you're trying to keep a low profile, and every 3 days the helicopters come in and kick out a bunch of batteries, you're no longer low profile. All right, your patrol is essentially over for all practical purposes. So what we've done is we've now in some cases doubled the life of the patrols by adding rechargeable and renewable assets at the tactical level. The Marines are doing great things, and we've now deployed this system to 4 brigade combat teams and 5 more in the mix. This system is tested at the NIE, the Network Integration event, down at Fort Bliss, and we expect continuing iterations of this. What we want to do is lighten the soldier's load, both their battery load and their cognitive load. Because also right now, that soldier, you and me, think of it, you got 7 different batteries, all right? You're running around, you're doing your stuff, and you're like, uh-oh, now I've got to go out on patrol. All right, well, when did I put the battery in? I put a battery into my goggles last night. I put a battery into my weapon today. I've got a new battery in my rate. I'm confused. So the behavior is to throw away all the batteries and get new ones. That's what you and I would do if we were in that situation. I mean, you want to know that you're going out with a full battery. By adding some information, the ability for the soldier to look at their power management supply in a heads-up display. You've got one battery, inductive charging, and inductive power transfer. So some of you, if you want to spend a lot of money, you can now go to the stereo store and they can do inductive power transfer to your speakers. So you don't have to have your speakers connected in. I'm out of time. Anyway, So we're looking at power transfer in and around the soldier, and as well as to lighten their cognitive load. In the next slide, because I said, you know, I don't buy anything. If you want to sell something to the Army, you can start here, and I'll take questions.
Do we have any questions in the room for Richard? Rose has a microphone.
Oh, leave that slide up. I want people asking where to go.
Thank you. Wondering, how do your frontline soldiers get resupplied with water?
And you are from where?
General Elect GE Water and Process Technologies.
I always ask that question. No, thanks. Well, a variety of systems are being deployed on the water side. So again, the first step is demand reduction. So we've deployed shower water reuse. So the shower water is reprocessed and reused as opposed to dumped, which has been a dramatic reduction in the need to transport water. In some cases, we've added well drilling assets that allow extraction of well water. In other cases, we still have to move water in some configuration. Soldiers do have the ability to purify water on the move, but there's always some health risks associated with that. So those are our current approaches. But a lot of, right now, what most of our effort has been on demand reduction, just making more efficient use of the water that we currently have.
We have time for maybe one more question.
Did I really?
Rose, there's a lady over here.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Driggers with Senator Tom Udall's office. One issue, as you are well aware of, is how we balance the need for renewable energy and the importance of renewable energy outside the military installations with the impact on the regional military installations. And I'd like to hear maybe some of your thoughts on that.
Could you, a little more specificity? I mean,
well, some of the renewable energy issues in New Mexico in particular involved, transmission lines that are being developed and some of the issues facing the nearby military installations.
Great. First of all, take back to the Senator my comment about Congress there and the FAR? Please. Anyway, now that's a great question. Whatever the military does, we value greatly our relationship with the local community. And we recognize that we have a strong military because we have a strong family, and we have strong families because they're part of a community, both on and off the installation. Just to your neighboring state, Fort Huachuca was they were in a water scarce environment, drought, lots of conflict over the available water. The garrison commander looked around, or the commanding general said, "Look, let's just stop irrigating." And the installation cut its water use by 23% in 1 month and kept that up. So we value the community relations. On the power issue, I talked about the relationship with the utilities and the need to ensure that our actions don't affect other ratepayers or the rate base or island utility assets out there by just the configuration. So we're very cognizant of that, and we take that part of all that. The issue of the power line, you're probably asking about SunZia. Is that what you're asking about, SunZia? Maybe, all right. So look, the Army is working with all the members of all the cooperating agencies, the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife, and others, and we're going through that cooperative, deliberative process. We have to put on the table legitimate military concerns. We recognize that these transmission lines, there's 7 of them across the country right now that are presidential priorities. We recognize that these are important for the country and for renewable energy, and we want to do all that we can to find a solution that everyone can agree to. And part of that is making known our real-world technical requirements and how those power lines can influence those. Also, possible mitigation steps. You know, if you go here or here, or if you're willing to pay for some mitigation measure, then maybe this can work. So I think we're really postured to try to reach an agreement, but there are very legitimate military concerns on some of these installations, and some of these concerns are the reason for being for that installation. So if you take away the reason for that installation because it can no longer do its primary mission, you sort of take away the reason for that installation. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
Well, on behalf of ReEnergize the Americas, Richard, really appreciate you being here. We know how busy your schedule is. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're running a little over schedule, so I'm gonna do just some real fast housekeeping here. Just want to make sure that everyone's aware that tomorrow there is a full breakfast here. Keep that in mind. The reception is at 6 o'clock this evening with a cash bar. Also, I wanted to thank Richard Gruber, Lincoln Renewable Energy. He pitch hitted this morning for Ron Lair, who had a family emergency and wasn't able to make it out to the conference. And then one last point, I'd like to have a round of applause for all the waiters and all the staff and service here for a very good meal and excellent service. All right, by the official clock up here, it says 1:38. By the program, we're supposed to be back in our rooms at 1:45. So away we go.